What's that? Growth, maybe? No. Hypertrophy? No. Strength? I didn't hear anything.
Hi guys, so we've got another brilliant chat for you, and this is to do with, and we've spoken about it before on the podcast in terms of like optimal progression or progression through a mesocycle, like week to week. How should you look to do things? And you guys will have heard of double progression, triple progression. Mike gets a lot of questions about how should you approach things, or even questions like, I did this week, what should I do next week? Increase reps, sets, load. And so Mike's going to kind of give you some real pointers of how to go through different progressions given the specificity of the goal in hand. So let's rock on with that.
Very cool. And then I'll look to you for some examples of how that works and maybe some counter examples of how not to do this.
Yeah.
So basically, the question is, how do you progress from microcycle to microcycle? Do you add weights to the bar? Do you add reps? Do you add sets? The details we can talk about probably in another video. They're very tiny and not very relevant. And to the extent that they're relevant, they usually require a real long technical explanation. It's probably better suited for a book.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also relatively individual specific. So for example, just a really quick example of individual specific, if you have, if you're doing lateral raises with 5 kilo dumbbells, and the next dumbbells up at your gym are 7 kilo dumbbells, you don't progress every week by 2 kilos because that is like 30% of the load. That's insane. That's like going from squatting 700 pounds one week to going 1,000 next week and then 1,300, but that's nonsense, right? So in that case, you might add reps week to week for a while until you're out of the rep range on the top end that you want, and then you could go to 7 kilos from 5, or you could keep the reps the same but add sets every week. So we're progressing somehow, but the particulars are constrained by the situation. Maybe you have a plate stack that doesn't have 5 kilo or 2.5 kilo increments. It's just 10 kilos up every time. Another example. But that's all very precise stuff. We have some general rules for you guys how to progress to make sure that fundamentally 95% of the equation is taken care of. And here they are. So, 1, and this is a lot of this is stuff Steve just literally told me, and I'm putting in more formal language for him. So, when you are trying to hypertrophy, when the primary goal of your mesocycle is to add muscle size, we know that hypertrophy is dependent on a minimum intensity, an intensity range of maybe 60 to 75% on average, with metabolite training being an exception, of 1 repetition max. So most of the load lifted should be in that range. But we know that intensity has a facilitative role in that it has to, kind of a permissive role, that it has to be that general intensity, and after that we check the box. Other things matter more. The primary determinant of hypertrophy, as you may very well have known, especially from perusing Brad Schoenfeld's social media, is volume, is the primary driver of hypertrophy, so long as you're lifting hard, which means close-ish to failure within 4 reps or so, and usually you're lifting pretty heavy, 60 to 75% 1 rep. Volume is critical, and volume progression is almost certainly what allows you to hypertrophy the most. So fundamentally, on every single progression, your goal is very simple. So this is really important. Make stuff harder. Training has to get harder. But the correct answers for how to progress on hypertrophy is don't sacrifice volume in your progression. So whatever way you want to move up, whether it's up in weight, whether it's up in reps, if it's up in sets, whether it's up in proximity to failure, even though some of those things might be kept equal, maybe go 3 from fail 1 week, 2 from fail 1, all the way to failure in a week, last week drop sets and forced reps. Just make sure nothing you do drops your volume from the last week, unless that was your intention to recover or something. Mm-hmm. But if you're applying progressive overload, it has to be a volume overload more or less every time. So anything you do, there's tons of options. I just listed a bunch. Make sure your volume isn't being sacrificed. really quick, I'll get to the other two, and then we'll have an example from you for how that can happen. When you are progressing on strength, you want a strength mesocycle. How do you progress? Whatever way you progress, just make sure your intensity isn't being sacrificed. So this is a good idea to push up higher and higher volumes in a strength phase. Sure, that gives you a bigger stimulus of heavy lifting, which make you stronger. But if you have to take weight off of the bar, intensity, technically stated, to get the volumes, you are not running a strength program. You can call it whatever you want, but it's actually now a hypertrophy program, a shitty one, because you're just justifying to get more volume. And then the last kind of delimiter is make sure that in your progression, you're aware of the effect of accumulative fatigue. So when someone says, hey, what do you think of this progression? I go up by 2 sets per week on every exercise for every week for 6 weeks. You're never going to survive that. So whatever progression scheme you have, so long as it doesn't sacrifice the main fitness characteristic that is adapting you, in the case of hypertrophy, volume, so long as the volume is being progressed, you're good to go. So long on a strength phase, intensity, weight on the bar is allowed to progress and it's not sacrificed, you're good to go. And so long as you're planning your progression in such a way that is sustainable for the mesocycle length you've chosen, everything else is a really tiny detail and not super important. So Steve, really quick, can you give us an example of how you would sacrifice volume on a hypertrophy progression? What is a common thing you've seen people do?
So if someone's going from, say, they're in week 1 of their program and they're 3 reps from failure, and week 2 is also 3 reps from failure, they might in week 1 get kind of sets a squat 3 by 100 by 10, and then the next week they look to increase the load to 105, but they're getting 8s for the same 3 sets. So they've actually sacrificed 2 reps on every set. And that extra load isn't attributing to more volume, so it actually dropped a fairly significant amount of volume.
So the total volume of the program is dropped.
Yeah.
And they're calling it a hypertrophy program, but the volume's dropped. How are you supposed to grow muscle when your volume's dropping? Volume is critical to hypertrophy, and they've shown that all other things being equal, if your volume drops, you're probably not growing muscle microcycle to microcycle. There's that novel stimulus. Whichever way it reveals itself in, it's unlikely to cause hypertrophy. Now, question, will that make you stronger?
Well, you'd hope so. That's the intensity.
Probably.
Yeah.
But hey, that particular going from 10s to 8s will make you stronger. But is it going to add muscle? Well, it only adds muscle if you maybe add a set of 8s that the total volume can be up. But then you probably run into the other problem where fatigue accumulates really fast like that. So fundamentally, that just means you're progressing too quickly. Maybe you should have gone to 102.5 instead of 105 and still hit sets of 10. Something like that. What about an example of sacrificing intensity on a program for strength? And how do people end up sacrificing intensity? I can think of a really good way, for sure. You got anything?
So if they could do the kind of, it's a bit of a weird thing, because obviously in the first example, they're putting on more intensity and sacrificing volume. And the same goes with kind of this progression, in that maybe they add another set and that actually causes the load that they're using to come down, or they get kind of fewer reps for the same weight or something like that with an extra set, and they're having to add multiple sets and things like this.
Yeah, and often I've gotten this question often, and there's actually a correct answer to this. So long as the overall fatigue is not excessive in a program, sometimes people say, okay, so I'm hitting 5s at 100 kilos. I was supposed to hit 5 by 5. And it's like my 3rd week or something. So let's say they deload right after that. So fatigue is not a concern. We can fuck shit up pretty well, and we're not concerned. I was supposed to hit 100 for 5 by 5. The load last week was 97.5. 100's a PR for 5 by 5. Even 97.5 for 4 by 5 was a PR. So 5 sets of 5 at 100 was my goal. And on the 3rd set, I hit a max 5. So sets 4 and 5, I know I'm not going to be able to crank out those reps. Question, should I reduce the load to like 90 to hit the 5s? Is there something fucking magical about 5 reps that get you strong? No. When we ever talk about rep ranges, it is only and always a proxy for load on the bar. Period. It's the 100 kilos that's magical. That's what's bigger than 97.5 at that total volume that gets you strong. So you might not want to sacrifice a ton of volume, because then the total stimulus, strength and strength and strength, that message, you want a lot of that message. It's a good message. 100 kilos is a good message, but you don't just come in and do 100 kilos for a single, because your muscles are like, what's that? Growth? Maybe? No. Hypertrophy? No. Strength? I didn't hear anything. So you want to hit the 100 kilos for a total of 25 repetitions, 5 by 5. But that's the trick of the verbiage. It's a total of 25 repetitions. 5 by 5 is a fine way to do them, but you get an almost identical effect if it's irrelevant how many reps per set you get, so long as you hit 25 reps at 100 kilos. And that is something very different of a stimulus than hitting 15 reps at 100 kilos and then dropping down and hitting 10 reps at 90 kilos. You have sacrificed intensity. You are no longer, you're just putting in extra volume. Mm-hmm. It's like a shitty way to hypertrophy, because if you really want to hypertrophy, you should go to 8s and 10s and give you even less volume for even more volume for even less fatigue. So fundamentally, the question of, okay, back to the example, I hit 3 by 5, and I swear to God, there's no way I'm going to get 5 at 100 kilos for these next 2 sets. What do I do? Easy answer, go to triples. You can finish up in triples, and if triples are really hard, go to doubles. Finish all those 10 reps you have left at 100 kilos, because it's the 100 kilos that's making you strong. Mm-hmm. Nobody gets super strong by being like, I bench 500 pounds for triples, but then that got super hard to do for triples, so I went down to 405 and did sets of 15. It's like, it's going to get you a big chest, but it's not exactly going to get you strong. Like, if you can bench 405 or 15, that's not making you stronger at the time. It may be causing more muscle growth, but that takes a long time to transmute into strength, blah, blah, blah. So people, just to stick to a certain rep range, will lighten the load. Yeah. Wrong for strength. Absolutely wrong. And then I guess lastly, how have you seen people who are kind of, I don't want to say addicted to progression, but have you ever seen someone try to progress too quickly and then burn out halfway through a mesocycle? How does that tend to happen?
So that could be that case in point in which maybe what you just described happened in like week 2, mm-hmm. where they're going to get the 5 by 5, and so if they were to push out those extra triples, that might take them over their MRV, whereas for which they very may well do, but then the next week they got nowhere to go. So I guess in that situation, you would keep the load the same. You'd let volume drop, because you're letting that intensity, because you're in a strength block, intensity is king. So if there's something that's got to go, it's going to be volume.
I would say that if you're really messed up and you're in week 2 and you reach that same example of, I have to do 5 by 5 at 100 kilos. I know I'm going to get 3 by 5. After set 2, you grind out the last 5th one, and you're like, my God, if you even get a third set of 5, that'll be a miracle. The answer is, you did set 2, go home. Take the rest of that week as a recovery week, come back and start chipping away at it again. Deload. You're not able to present an overload anymore. The question is no longer, can you survive this week? Sure, you can do that method I just described, go to triples or doubles. But unless it's the last week, what you going to do? What's scheduled? 5 by 5 at 102.5 next week? There's no way you're going to hit that. You're not. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, how about I still use the method you just described where I do doubles and triples? Really? You're going to do 25 reps in doubles? You're going to die. Someone's going to find you on the gym floor. They'll put more technically, your level of accumulated fatigue is going to be insane. And it takes weeks to bring down, because that's primarily nervous system fatigue at that point. That's not even muscular fatigue. So it's just a really shitty idea. You're just going to get literally weaker doing that. So I think a lot of times people say, okay, I have this grandiose plan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 sets a week for 6 weeks. Like, okay, first easy question is, what is it going to put you related to your MRV? If you start at your MEV, you go to your MRV, especially if you're a more advanced athlete, that's like 4 sets difference. If you add 2 sets every week for 4 weeks, that's 8 sets. You've exited your MRV by 4 sets. You're never going to survive that, ever. So when you plan your progression, plan to get to just under your MRV, and if it's a really good cycle and all your recovery stuff is on point, maybe you can extend it by 1 microcycle, or maybe you could up it by 2 sets if you just don't feel anything the first week, or the third week's too easy. save some and make sure your progressions are logical so that you're not planning to progress into a no-limit zone of just like total insanity where you make crazy PRs. Another thing, while we're ranting on the subject, because we more or less kind of described the whole subject, another thing is, I don't know how to like real talk this any more than I'm going to real talk this. If you're expecting every mesocycle to be the best one ever where you hit these outlandish miracle PRs, and you know deep down you're never going to fucking hit these numbers, stop programming like that, because then you're literally just programming to overreach early, to have to deload, and you're always left with your arms at your sides and going, oh, I wonder what I did wrong. Like, I've read some people's programs before that they've sent to me, like, what do you think about this? Deadlift PR, 110 kilos. Goal for mesocycle, 120 for 5x5. I'm like, are you out of fucking mind? Like, well, I feel like if I do 100, and then I do 105, and then I do 110, I do 115, I do 120, I'm like, first of all, what the fuck is wrong with you going up by 5 kilos every time? Second of all, like, what world do you live in that someone PRs by 10 kilos and 5 reps, 5x5 versus a single? And they're like, well, I was just thinking, like, I don't know, like, and then they go, like, I want to get strong. Like, motherfucker, we all want to get strong. But if it was about writing shit on a page, Jesus, why are you stopping there? And sometimes I troll people just for fun and good nature. And they're like, why don't you go to 150? And they're like, you think? I'm like, yeah. They're like, you don't think that's too much? I'm like, I think 120 is too much. I think if you can do 3x3 at 100, or 110 was your PR. I think if you do 3x3 at 110, oh my God, you're amazing. And if you could do 5x5 at 95, wow. And they're like, yeah, I don't know. I think I can do more. Well, how about this? Do less. Surprise me. And then when it's too easy, you can chalk it up, still hit PRs, and be like, that was too easy. It's always better to have a mesocycle that was a little too easy. Ooh, I have more, but you're nice and deloaded. You can start again, versus one that, like, it's the 6th mesocycle to crush your dreams. Don't do that. Plan realistic progressions.